Good evening and welcome to tonight's STEM Café, Exercise Your Brain, how aerobics and strength training improve brain function. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight you will learn the importance of exercise for brain health throughout the life cycle, particularly strength training and moderate intensity aerobic exercise. You will learn about related current research being conducted by our NIU researchers, Dr. Jamie Mayer, Professor Allied Health and Communicative Disorders, and Dave Benner Jr., Instructor Gerontology in the Department of Kinesiology and Physical Education. I'm Dr. Judy Diamond, organizer of the STEM Cafes for the past 9 years, and your host for this evening. Our STEM Cafes are brought to you by NIU STEAM in the Center for P20 Engagement at Northern Illinois University. NIU STEAM refers to science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. We want to thank Thermo Fisher Scientific for making it possible for us to offer this STEM Cafe tonight free of charge. We usually hold our STEM Cafes in restaurants and look forward to getting back to the restaurant soon. Our partner restaurant, Fatty's Pub and Grill in DeKalb, is offering a 10% discount to anyone who mentions that they attend our cafe tonight. Thanks to the generosity of our patrons, we are able to offer this STEM Cafe free of charge. Please consider making a donation so we can continue to provide engaging programs like this one. Any donation is appreciated, small or large. The link to donate is go.niu/give-NIU-STEAM. We will also have that link on the chat this evening. I also want you to be aware of our upcoming fundraiser for STEMfest called Huskies United 2021, which will take place on June 23rd and 24th. It will be 1,895 minutes of giving. That's about 31 hours. Help keep NIU STEMfest innovative, exciting, and free for all participants, young and old. STEMfest is in its 11th year and is held every October. STEMfest is our free annual celebration of science, technology, engineering, and math. A total of 7,000 STEMfest volunteers have helped more than 50,000 people enjoy 1,200 exhibits that excite and inspire a love of STEM. We have had over 8,000 attendees. This year we will be back in person in the center of our DeKalb campus. Your donation provides support for NIU students to plan and lead hands-on exhibits that build curiosity, spark imagination, and foster a love of science, technology, engineering, art, and math in a generation of thinkers, doers, and creators. As we reimagine STEMfest for 2021 and beyond, we need funding for interactive exhibits, spectacular demonstrations, and ongoing activities to keep students engaged all year round. Your donation directly provides positive STEM experiences for our students and our STEMfest families. Please help STEMfest make a difference in the lives of NIU students, staff, volunteers, and all participants. If you don't want to wait, you can donate today at go.niu.edu/give-NIU-STEAM. This link will be on our chat this evening. For those of you that have not attended our STEM Cafes, our format for this evening is as follows. Our speakers will talk for approximately an hour. During the talk and following the talk, you can send in your questions and comments. Please use the Q&A for the questions, not the chat. We know that there are many experts in the audience as well, so often our attendees add to the discussion with their comments and insight. We will end by 8 p.m. If you experience difficulty during the presentation, you can find a volume control on your screen that can be adjusted to your particular liking. I believe it is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. This cafe will be recorded. It will be posted on our website in about a week, as we need to make sure that we have closed captions to make it accessible for all. We welcome your feedback. As a matter of fact, many of our STEM cafes have been suggested by our audience. If you are interested in providing feedback or making a suggestion for a future NIU STEM Cafe, you can find the survey on our chat this evening, or contact me at jdymond@niu.edu, or you may call 815-753-4751. Our next STEM Cafe will be held on July 14th, 6 p.m., and it will be the physics of the Olympics. So let's get started. With tonight's virtual STEM Cafe, Exercise Your Brain, How Aerobics and Strength Training Improve Brain Function, we understand that exercise improves our cardiovascular health. But did you know that aerobics and strength training also boost brain health and function? In both healthy adults and those with stroke, dementia, or other cognitive impairment, exercise programs improves cognition and increases executive functions such as problem solving and planning. The speakers tonight will address the questions and comments that you put in the Q&A after their talks. Our first speaker tonight is Dave Benner, Jr. He is an NIU instructor in gerontology in the Department of Kinesiology and Physical Education. In 2012, he earned his MS in Education degree from Northern Illinois University. As instructor of record at NIU since 2012, he teaches the Clinical Experience and Exercise Gerontology course at NIU, which partners kinesiology and athletic training majors with older adult clients. In his course, students gain hands-on experience working as personal trainers, exercise coaches, throughout the semester. Each student is tasked with helping improve their client's physical fitness, which includes strength, balance, mobility, coordination, flexibility, cognition, and fall prevention. His research focuses primarily on balance and fall prevention, exercise equipment, and cognition using older adult subjects. I'm pleased to introduce to you Dave Benner, Jr. Dave, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I'm here. Am I live? Am I good?
You are.
All right. Thank you, Judy, for the nice introduction here. What a pleasure it is to be able to be a part of this. Before I get started, I think I just want to say thank you, Judy, for all the effort that this is. Let me try to get my light back on. All the effort that's taken place in order to make this happen. I would have never realized how much organizing it took to get everything prepped, all the practice, and just the time that you spend. I think it just deserves a little bit of recognition first, and you've done great. And I think a lot of people are really appreciative for the knowledge that everybody's gaining through your hard work and through these endeavors. So I think just a little bit of recognition towards you just to start, I think is well worthy.
Well, thank you very much.
Before I get going, I've got a little presentation here, but I wanted to maybe just kind of give a little brief breakdown of what I do and kind of talk about just some of the roles I play at NIU and as far as what I do with the class and as far as my research goes, what kind of stuff that I do, what roles I play. Whenever I got hired on at Oakcrest or at NIU, I started working with older adults. I developed a passion immediately to just understand what it took to make somebody's life a little better, the quality of life, how much you can really improve that, just through every day's interaction, through exercise in particular, which is what I'm going to really emphasize today, but also just through what you can do as far as the positive interactions, the socialization, the things that you gain every day. For example, I work at Oakcrest, working with several older adults, putting them through training regimens, focusing on balance, fall prevention, strength training, coordination, brain exercises, and a number of other things. And throughout all of my years, I've been working here for 8 years now. I've really seen a lot of clients improve on so many different aspects of their life, not just on their physical fitness, but mentally. They were able to be able to recall things, to be able to be more active, to be quicker with the things that they can recall. These types of things might not seem as important to somebody young or middle aged, but as you go throughout the aging process, you start to realize how important it is to have an active and healthy brain, and how important it plays a role on your quality of life and the things that you can easily do, or in some cases, the things that you struggle with. And being able to see this firsthand made me realize how important of a role it is for me to play, especially whenever it comes to exercise, brain stimulation, the effects of aerobic and anaerobic exercise. Also, whenever it comes to things like doing brain stimulation exercises, where we're working on coordination and manipulating the right and left hemispheres of our brain. There's just a number of things that really contribute to healthy living, especially healthy living throughout an older adult aging process. And that's really what I've focused on. And I bring students into the clinical classroom, in this case out at Oakcrest or DeKalb Retirement Center, to really try to gain this firsthand experience working with older adults, so they can understand how important this role that they're playing as a trainer, taking them through exercise routines, training them to be more coordinated, to help prevent falls and other things that really just improve their physical abilities, their mental capacity, and yet again, their quality of life. This is something that has really made a big impact on the residents out at Oakcrest, physically and mentally, as well as the students. All the students that come through our program have unanimously agreed that this is a very, very important class for them to gain hands-on experience working with older adults, and to also be able to apply that to things like their grandparents, to their future careers, and to use it as a resume booster, as something to help build their career. It's just been a really important impact that this particular class has been able to make, not just on the residents out at Oakcrest, but even the students as well. So that's kind of the role I play out at Oakcrest and what I do through NIU. My research has been focused primarily on fall prevention, balance improvements, and the little things that we can do to help improve our center of pressure, or to be more consciously aware of better posture, body awareness, spatial awareness, the sensory inputs that are able to be manipulated that help improve balance. Those have been my primary focus, although I have done several brain exercise studies related to trying to manipulate short-term and as well as long-term memory effects. I've played an important role whenever doing some research on physical fitness test equipment for older adults that help improve balance, strength, and coordination. So those are my primary areas of interest whenever it comes to research. I'm still doing a lot of stuff right now. My current stuff that I'm doing is focusing on the psychological effects of COVID-19. We're about ready to to ramp up some stuff here once we can get a little more access to some facilities. Now that we're in stage 5, I think that we're going to be able to move forward and really see some cool studies and some make some good research related to the psychological and physical effects of COVID-19 as it relates to those areas. So that's a little bit about me, what my research is. I think what I want to do now is I want to just kind of get started with my presentation here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works. I think we practiced it, but I just want to make sure that that I've got everything. Somebody let me know if it's not working right. Hopefully it is. Hopefully you can see the STEM Cafe, learn to grow. You're never too old to learn. Learning is something that not just is important for those in elementary, middle, and high school, college age. It's important throughout your entire aging process. If you can stimulate your brain, you're going to keep an active brain. You're going to keep those neurons firing. Those connections will stay stronger. It's just going to benefit you over a longer period of time. It's very easy to tell this. Since this presentation is primarily focusing on the exercise specifically related to brain function, as well as cardio and strength, I wanted to first start off by highlighting some of the brain aspects of it, and specifically what exercise does to your brain function, specifically for your executive controls. It primarily has a huge effect on the executive controls, which correlate to short-term and long-term memory, your ability to plan and schedule tasks throughout your day, to keep everything orderly, to make things so they seem fluid and so you're not so strung out, you could say. Your ability to multitask, do multiple things at a time while staying proficient at the same time. Being able to deal with setbacks, ambiguity, anything like that. These executive controls are a big part, and exercise has been shown to help improve it. This is something that I'm about to get into, but the executive control functions are something that I do want you to remember, which is kind of why I wanted to start with it. The next thing that I wanted to highlight here is the Cotman rat studies. This is a really big study that came out of the University of Illinois back in 2002, and it highlighted the effects of exercise on rats. This study it found some extremely important information specifically related to BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And what this exercise did specifically was produced BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which positively increased brain plasticity. Before I get into all of this stuff, first off, what are some of the exercise benefits? Most of you already know, and I doubt that I really need to highlight it too in depth, but just to go over some of the basic stuff, it helps you improve your strength, your coordination, and it helps you lower your body composition, helps improve and lower your risk of developing a comorbidity, helps reduce your risk of developing heart disease, more favorable body composition, helps regulate your blood pressure, reduces the risk of diabetes, obesity, helps improve those with arthritis by maintaining or decreasing the effects of it. Tons and tons of benefits related to exercise. I tried to highlight a lot of them that might be applicable to older adults in particular, but there's a lot more that I didn't even highlight. So what this does is, what was found in these rat studies was these rats that exercise on an exercise wheel, just running in circles, were producing high levels of BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which contributed to very high increases of brain plasticity. If you were wondering what brain plasticity is, or neuroplasticity, this is something that is really important to recognize. What what it does. What does BDNF do? Well, the neuroplasticity really offers a protection. It makes your axons a lot more efficient. The neuron connections between one to the other can really be efficient if you have higher levels of BDNF due to higher increases of brain plasticity. And this plasticity really offers a lot of hope for those that might be experiencing stroke, or who might be dyslexic, or might just have trouble processing things at maybe what might be considered a normal or a general normal rate of speed. It also allows a regulation of long-term potentiation, specifically by keeping the strength of the connections, the neuron connections, strong, proficient, and really long-lasting throughout a lifespan. That's if you're able to keep that brain plasticity elevated. If you start to notice low levels of BDNF and low levels of brain plasticity, your connections might be reduced. They might not be as strong. They might be weaker. They might not make a connection anymore, which might result in coordination issues or speech impediment or a number of other issues that stroke or other issues that are related to impairments related to injuries or as I mentioned, strokes. BDNF also acts as a protector. It helps things from falling apart. Also helps reduce the risk of blood clots or even the slowing of blood flow. It helps keep those axons strong, keep them going. So throughout the aging process, it can really be efficient. And the more efficient something is, the more capable you're going to be, and the quicker you are going to be with your ideas and what's going on in your brain. So with this study, as I mentioned earlier, they had a bunch of rats running on a wheel. Some ran on a wheel, others just sat sedentary, didn't move. And those, they expected the changes to be seen in the motor and sensory areas of the brain. And what ended up happening is just after short periods of time, 2 to 7 nights of running, they found a 20% increase in BDNF. And this increase in BDNF was extremely important because they didn't necessarily have to go too long. They just, would run a little bit. I guess, according to this study, 5Ks per night, which seems like a lot, but whenever you're running on a wheel nonstop and you don't have anything else to do as far as the rat, it was something that they didn't really, the rats weren't too exhausted after it, according to the study. They found that the BDNF remained increased for up to 3 days post-exercise. This is something extremely important to take away, because if you exercise on a Monday, you'll still be able to reap the benefits of an active brain and increased brain plasticity, even up to 3 days. So all the way up into Wednesday or Thursday in that week from that Monday workout that you were able to do, which is so important because you want to have a healthy brain, and brain plasticity is going to help improve that. BDNF as well. The main changes were found in the hippocampus, particularly. In the hippocampus, the 3 main areas were dominated in the literature were the inhibition, memory, and space. Specifically in the frontal lobe, which was in the hippocampus, a lot of the aspects of what the hippocampus does, it contributes to learning, memory, long-term and short-term. It's even one of the main targets for Alzheimer's. Whenever somebody does develop Alzheimer's, it tends to have a negative impact on how active your hippocampus is. And if your hippocampus is very active, you're likely able to recall things much more fluidly, learn much easier, likely not having too big of an issue with Alzheimer's. The exercise and BDNF benefits were also found in the frontal cortex. This is a primary area for your decision making or insight, also related to the areas of your executive functions. I go back to what I first started with the planning, scheduling, multitasking, and that type of thing. Memory as well. So if it's playing a role in the hippocampus and frontal cortex, we know that exercise is positively contributing to memory, your learning, your executive functioning, which is extremely important for keeping an active, healthy brain and throughout your aging process to make sure that you have a higher quality of life. The consequences of up to 3 weeks of exercise showed an increase in BDNF in the hippocampus, specifically in the increase in quantity and structures of the fibers and the synaptic connections, meaning those connections were much quicker. They gained more connections, meaning those axons were really well developed, and even new connections were seen, meaning neurogenesis, which is extremely important to be able to find that type of information, because if that's occurring, that means that neurons can still be produced even throughout our aging process. We've just got to keep that blood flow and oxygen going through our brain by using exercise as the means to do it. It's one of the biggest things that we need to consider if you want to try to keep an active, healthy brain throughout our age. Even brain plasticity increased up to 37%. The metabolism showed a 24% increase, which also contributed to more energy for the brain to burn. It also increased to higher endorphin levels, which increased not just the energy levels, but the mood, which obviously endorphins have a really positive impact on the way your positive attitude, especially whenever it relates to depression, helps reduce the likelihood of developing it. The immune system also had a positive response, which it increased 11%, and the anti-aging protein also increased 15%. Yes, that is correct. Anti-aging protein was able to be increased, meaning you look younger if you're staying active and healthy. And what kind of role did the exercise bouts play on depression? Well, exercise is often recommended to those that are depressed, but it's sometimes difficult to get those that are depressed to start exercising. One of the things that you might consider starting with is maybe just beginner level of aerobic or even anaerobic exercise. One of my biggest things that I recommend to all of the older adults out at Oakcrest is to get involved in our exercise program. But if nothing else, get out and be active. One of the best ways to do it is walking. Walking is a simple aerobic exercise that if you're doing it for a long enough period of time, then you can really feel it in your cardio. You can feel it throughout your bones. It's a good muscle activation. Even anaerobic exercise like strength training has been shown to help even decrease depression as well as improve and stimulate our memory. So lots of important takeaways as far as depression. And I know that right now, specifically with depression and COVID-19, it's a bigger issue simply because a lot of people have developed higher stress levels, maybe even started to take on a little bit of depression due to a lot of isolation or not being able to do things like you normally do. This is something that you can help combat by exercise, by being physically active. So how did it help? Well, it increased the mood enhancing neurotransmitters by increasing the pulse and respiration and perspiration rates. It boosts your endorphins, increased the appetite, increased the body temperature, lowered muscle tension, and even lowered your cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So if you feel like you've been stressed, think about exercise. It could be one of the best decisions that you make. Exercise also played a very valuable role on how cardiovascular disease was reduced, simply because of the physical activity impacts that it had. It helped reduce hypertension, diabetes, stroke. I'm not going to get into this portion too much because I know Dr. Mayer here is going to be highlighting a number of these aspects. So I kind of let her dive into here. So I'm just going to kind of be a little brief with this. One other thing that was really found to be valuable and a good takeaway from this rat study was the enriched environment aspect. Physical activity in enriched environment helped decrease the cognitive impairments in the rats, specifically when the rats had some stimuli in their environment. And you can see in the slide here, those rats that were found in an empty cage, an empty box with no toys to play on, no wheels to run on, no interactions or very minimal interactions. It did not help stimulate their brain, and they were they didn't have the cognitive improvements like those that were in the enriched environment with toys and the other stimuli. What they were able to take away simply by the location that they put the rats in their living environment, those rats that were put in an enriched environment, something that kept their brain stimulated, kept them active, they were less likely to develop Alzheimer's, which was a huge takeaway. Another thing that has been found, and this is a Lockman study in 2006 titled Strong for Life. Specifically, they found in this study that the working memory or your short-term memory can have some very positive impacts by doing strength training. Specifically, this study studied workout that were done with bands at home. Meaning, if they were doing a low resistance or a medium or average resistance or even a high resistance exercise band, they were able to see positive impacts on their working or short-term memory. Meaning, if you want to try to keep an active, healthy brain to help improve your memory, stay active. Do some anaerobic and aerobic exercising, like walking. The anaerobic portion in particular, doing some band exercises, very cheap. Bands cost less than $10, and you can easily do a ton of exercises to highlight nearly every single muscle group in your body, which also not just stimulates the muscle contraction and improvements of muscle strength and mass, but it also will help stimulate the brain and will help your short-term or working memory, which was a huge find and a big takeaway specifically for what we're talking about. Whenever I work and whenever I'm teaching my students, I always try to encourage my students to take a short walk before an exam because it's going to get more blood flow and oxygen flowing throughout the body, but specifically throughout the brain to help stimulate that brain, to help increase the ability to make fluid and neuron connections and that connectivity to make it so they can be more proficient on the exam. So what I hope that you take away from, this little portion that I'm doing here is that exercise is like mind food for your brain. It's one of the best things that you can do: anaerobic, aerobic, walking, strength training. Start out small, work up a little bit, and as you start to build up on it, you can really see the benefits. Some good things to take away: keep your brain involved, do some Sudoku, crosswords, maybe some jigsaw puzzles or word challenges. These are some big things. These are often some of the bigger things that we do in our exercise program out at Oakcrest. Here you can see a picture of myself and a number of the clients that live out at Oakcrest. You can see the exercise room, what we do, some of the equipment. We've actually added quite a few stuff since this picture was taken, but you can see that we focus on balance and strength and cardio. We've got a number of things to help stimulate the body and the mind. And that's what I want to try to end with here, to encourage all of you to really stimulate your body, stimulate your brain, help you might just, the real challenge, it might just be to start small and then build up little by little, and keep telling yourself that these improvements are going to help you. They're going to improve your brain. They're going to help reduce the likelihood of having cognitive impairment. You're going to have a better memory, better body composition. These are little things that you can make an impact on by making the conscious decision to do this stuff. All right, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Judy here. Here we go. Judy, are you here? Uh-oh, hopefully we didn't lose Judy. I'll turn my, there we go.
Not to worry, here I am.
All right.
Thank you, Dave. It was great. And thank you for all of your efforts and your research. I think we can all benefit from it. So at this time, we're going to introduce our second speaker, and we'll be back to Dave just a little bit later. Dr. Jamie Mayer is NIU Associate Professor, Allied Health and Communicative Disorders. She received her BA, MA, and PhD in Speech and Hearing Services from Indiana University. She earned the 2020 NIU Excellence and Undergraduate Teaching Award for her contribution in and out of the classroom. Recently, Dr. Mayer was NIU's winner of the Mid-American Conference 2021 Outstanding Faculty Award for Student Success. The award recognizes one faculty member from each of the 12 MAC institutions for their outstanding efforts in developing students both inside and outside the classroom. Dr. Mayer has a prior background as a medical speech language pathologist. She teaches undergraduate neuroscience and assessment courses and graduate level courses covering medical, speech pathology, and neurogenic cognitive communicative disorders. Her research focuses on behavioral treatment strategies to maximize cognition, communication, and engagement for individuals with acquired neurogenic cognitive communicative disorders, such as stroke, brain injury, or dementia. She runs a choir for individuals with dementia residing in long-term care. It is called the Bridges Choir and is currently in virtual format. She is also the faculty advisor for the Music and Memory program, which involves matching undergraduate students to individuals with dementia in DeKalb area facilities to provide personalized music and other types of reminiscent stimuli. Both Dave Benner and Jamie Mayer spent a good amount of time making sure that people had a quality life during the pandemic, and we can thank them both for that. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Mayer. Jamie, would you please begin?
Sure. Can you all see me and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I'm Jamie Mayer, and Judy, thank you so much. I will go ahead and just share my screen here. Give me just a second. Here we are. All right. Okay. So some of what I'm going to say is going to be repeating what Dave just said, and that's okay, because one of the major principles of neuroplasticity and of learning is that repetition actually helps learn information. So some of what I'm saying will be building, again, directly on what Dave just said, and some of it will be kind of a different twist. But both he and I do follow similar paths. So both, working with individuals with either stroke, dementia, etc., and working on improving quality of life, basically, in various ways. So as Dave touched on, there's a lot of research out there showing that brain function, specifically aspects of brain that have to do with cognition, decline with age. but there's a caveat here. We know that things like processing speed, working memory, executive control, and episodic memory do tend to change with age. And I'm going to define a couple of those just in case. I know Dave, again, had touched on these. This is an example of a working memory task. So see how you do. What I want you to do is just say true or false for the following sentences. There's only 3 of them. So here's the first one. Here's the second one. There's the third one. Okay, now tell me the last word in each of those sentences. And you can't because you're on Zoom, but say it to yourself. And then test yourself and see if you got it right. So at the end, when we do the Q&A, you can tell me. Typically, when I do this with students, even though it's only 3 sentences, they tend to miss at least 1 word. They're usually close, but they often will say like birds, cars, blue, or fly, babies, blue, or something like that. So see how you did. Basically, what working memory is it's short-term memory plus processing. So that's why I made you look at those sentences and answer true or false. And then tell me the last word. So if I'm testing working memory, like, bedside in a hospital setting or in an outpatient setting, what I will usually do is say to the person, okay, first I want you to repeat some digits after me and just repeat them in the same order I do. So here's an example, 7, 4, 2, 6, 1. So you could repeat those right back, right? Okay, if I really want to test working memory, what I would do is say, okay, now this time I'm going to say some digits again, and I want you to repeat them, but in the opposite order that I do. In other words, if I say 416, you would say 614. Okay, so here's a longer example. Again, kind of a working memory task. 3, 6, 8, 7, 1. So if you were to repeat those back in the opposite order, think about it. We'll come back to it. Okay, again, executive control. Another thing that Dave touched on, a real important subject, especially when we're talking about the effects of aerobic exercise. If I'm defining this for students, what I usually tell them is executive function is what makes you a grown-up. So by definition, it's what little kids lack. So I usually show this photo. This is my youngest daughter. She's in a refrigerator. She's not wearing any pants. Obviously not a grown-up. This was a few years ago. But executive control is what, as an adult, would tell you, don't do this, right? So that's executive control in a nutshell. And then the other thing that was mentioned in the earlier slide. So aging does tend to affect episodic memory. And what I mean by that is that's your memory for like day-to-day events. So in this slide, obviously, episodic memory would be, a wedding day, but it can also be something as simple as, hey, where did I park my car? Did I take my meds today? What did I eat for breakfast, etc. And these are all things, again, that with age tend to decline. That said, an increasing body of research, as it tells you right here, has actually shown us that we have more control than we thought, which is a really cool concept, right? So lifestyle factors like social networks, staying cognitively active, and physical activity do seem to mediate how well people age. And of those 3 things, the strongest evidence out there supports physical activity for mediating age-related cognitive decline. Again, as Dave mentioned. One other thing just to think about when you think about physical activity in general is like any activity. The studies that I'm going to talk about include things like aerobic exercise as well as resistance exercise. So just realize that these are subtypes of physical activity. So aerobic exercise tends to be things that are more structured, repetitive, takes typically kind of as a measure of endurance. Resistance exercise, things like weight training, etc. Now, as Dave mentioned, cardiorespiratory fitness seems to be directly correlated with cognitive function. And I think this is something that might be counterintuitive. I know anecdotally, at least for me, I've always known that, if I have something that I really need to think hard about, going for a run helps me, right? It'll help kind of clear my head in that moment. But I never really thought about the long-term effects of physical activity until I started researching it myself. So we all know that, in the moment, again, we feel good when we work out, usually. But those long-term effects, the idea that regularly working out actually changes your overall cognitive function, that's really cool to think about, right? So here's some examples of some longitudinal and cross-sectional studies, all with healthy aging individuals, and basically just showing that people who tend to be more physically active or who engage in regular physical activity tend to have better cognitive outcomes, even when it's measured 6 years down the road, which is, again, kind of cool to think about. Now, those are cross-sectional longitudinal studies, but the stronger evidence comes from intervention studies, where researchers can actually control or have more control over what participants are doing. So, and what researchers have found in intervention studies, again, with healthy aging individuals, is again, some pretty strong evidence showing that if you take someone who's relatively sedentary, engage them in some sort of physical activity program, have them do it regularly over a period of time, cognitive performance will tend to be enhanced. When you look at all of the literature, a few things stand out, because a lot of you might be thinking right now, like, okay, well, what do I do? How do I get started? What does the literature actually say? So what has stood out from the literature in terms of kind of where to start and what do you do is how much time you should engage in physical activity, how intense the physical activity should be, and kind of what you need to think about. So in terms of time, what a lot of studies have shown is that you need to be engaging in physical activity a minimum of 2 to 3 times a week and a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes per session to see some of these longer term cognitive effects. And then the other thing is that, again, and this might be a little counterintuitive, people tend to think, okay, the harder the workout, the better, right? So I'm not going to jog, I'm going to run. I'm not going to golf, I'm going to, I don't know, what would be harder than golfing? Something harder. But actually, what tends to work best for cognitive outcomes is moderate physical activity. So sort of that medium level of physical activity. Some examples of moderate intensity exercises are listed here. And I've got a whole long handout that I can send to Judy afterwards. That's just downloaded from a CDC website. So some of these are things you would probably think about. So, jogging, cycling. Some of these, though, are exercises that you might not have thought of before. So juggling, according to the CDC, is considered moderate intensity. I did not know that. Things like gardening, yard work, housework, if it's like moderate housework, so like actually scrubbing floors, standing up, sweeping. Another cool one, and we'll come back to this, is singing is actually considered moderate intensity exercise if you're doing it while moving around. So like, for example, in a choir setting or a church setting, okay? Another thing to note about exercise is that some studies have shown that beyond just exercising, you'll have better cognitive outcomes if you're actually enjoying the exercise that you're doing, if it's meaningful to you, if you're actually engaged in it. So, maybe group aerobics classes, maybe some sort of sport that you care about. In terms of cognitive outcomes, those types of situations seem to engender even better effects than just sort of that decontextualized, like a recumbent bike or something that you might, automatically think about. Now, Dave already covered basically where exercise affects the brain. Now, if you were in my undergrad neuroscience class, I would make you learn all of these different parts of the brain and then go into a little more about where exercise has its effects. But because we have limited time, we're just going to look at a simplified version. And what I want you to think about is basically exercise affects this part of the brain, the front of the brain, frontal lobe, and that's where executive functions live. So think about that picture of my daughter in the refrigerator and how she's not an adult, most of us are. This part of your brain, that front part, hopefully you can see my cursor here, that's the part that's fully developed in adults. And that's the part of your brain that exercise seems to affect the most. Another part of your brain affected by exercise, as Dave pointed out, is the hippocampus. So that's the part of your brain that's real important for episodic memories. So again, remembering what you ate for breakfast or where you put your phone or your keys, etc. Those are the parts of the brain that are most affected by exercise. Okay. Now, if you remember the functions that tend to decline with age, the cognitive functions, so things like working memory, executive function, processing speed, I think was in there. Those are the same exact functions that are affected by exercise. So when we talk about exercise having a positive cognitive effect, especially for those of us who might be worried about cognitive decline associated with aging, it matches up perfectly. Exercise can actually kind of reverse some of the things that we see in a setting, in the aging brain. Okay. As Dave mentioned, it's not just aerobic exercise that matters. So resistance training matters too. There's actually been studies showing that if you combine aerobic exercise and weight training, you get better results, not just physically, cognitively, which is really cool to think about, versus aerobic exercise alone. Now, Dave already went into sort of how this all works, or basically the brain mechanisms of the cognitive effects of exercise. So I'm going to kind of just skip over this. He mentioned BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. There's another growth factor called insulin-like growth factor, but both of those tend to be affected by exercise. Interestingly, some research shows that aerobic exercise upregulates BDNF, whereas resistance training might upregulate IGF, or insulin-like growth factor. In any case, both of those factors affect what are called neurotransmitters, which basically are like the little chemicals that neurons use to communicate with one another. So if one neuron wants to talk to another neuron, the only way to do it is through these chemicals called neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are also upregulated by exercise. What happens at the supramolecular level, in other words, how this all works sort of functionally, is illustrated here. So people who engage in regular exercise have more of what's called angiogenesis. And what that means is formation of new blood vessels. So think about this. This is cool. So if you exercise, more blood is going to your brain. That makes sense, right? But what's actually happening with exercise that's repeated again and again over time is that your brain forms new blood vessels, allowing even more blood to go to your brain. So your brain's getting more nutrients, more oxygen, just supporting everything that you do, again, cognitively, not just physically. We also see formation of more neurons, specifically in the hippocampus, which should by now sound familiar to you. So that's the part of the brain, again, involved in formation of new episodic memories, or kind of day-to-day memories. And we see synaptogenesis, meaning that neurons are forming new connections. So again, it's not just that your brain is working better at that moment. It's your brain is making changes that will help it work better down the road. Now, the literature for the healthy aging population is pretty conclusive, right? So there's a lot of strong evidence out there that's been accumulating for probably the last, I'd say at least 50 years, really, about the effects of exercise on cognition. If you look specifically at the literature for individuals who already have some sort of acquired neurological disorders, so individuals with, say, dementia or stroke survivors, now the literature gets a little more messy. Are there positive effects of exercise? Absolutely. There's simply not as many studies, not as many strong studies, and just a bit more conflicting information. So I'm going to go through some of the information from some studies looking specifically at individuals with dementia and stroke. Now, correlational studies have been done, and these are all very strong. Basically, what you're seeing on this slide here, and if you kind of follow the arrow here, you can see it real clearly. So a study by Morris et al. In 2017 basically looked at lean muscle mass, or an indicator of cardiorespiratory fitness in individuals, matched that up with memory scores. And what they saw, even in individuals with early stage Alzheimer's disease, is that a higher level of fitness was correlated with higher memory scores. That's cool, right? So you can kind of see this line going straight up here. And again, these are individuals who already have dementia, and that correlation still holds. When we look at the intervention studies for individuals who have dementia. So in other words, not just correlation, but now we're looking at a stronger study design. So taking these individuals and actually putting them in an exercise program and then measuring cognition and seeing what happens. Now the evidence gets a little bit muddier. So I'm going to show you just a couple slides from some example studies here. So here's one where the researchers took a group of individuals with Alzheimer's disease and had them engage in regular cycling, so on a stationary bike. Then they took a second group of individuals and had them as kind of the control group. So they were doing stretching, range of motion exercises. And what they found was that both groups had improved cognition when they measured it 6 months later. So that's interesting. Even the controls improved. And remember, these are individuals who have Alzheimer's disease. They weren't supposed to improve, but they did. Okay. Here's another study, again, where the researchers were looking at an exercise group and a control group. And in this case, the control group was a social group. So they just had a group of individuals kind of doing, as you can see in the slide here, non-physical intervention. So just kind of socializing. And then they had a group that was exercising. And again, they found both groups improved, not just the exercise group, but also what was supposed to be the control group, social intervention. So the question is, what's happening, right? Why is the evidence getting a little bit muddier here? Before we answer that question, I'm going to go real quickly into the stroke literature. So I was part of a group that was supported by the ANCDS, which I can never remember what it stands for, but I wrote it down so that I wouldn't forget. It's the American, hold on. I'm just going to double check so that I don't mess it up. Here we go. It's not the American, the Academy of Neurological Communication Disorders and Sciences, ANCDS. Anyway, so I'm part of a group supported by the ANCDS, and what we're doing is conducting various systematic reviews looking at neurogenic cognitive or communication disorders. The most recent systematic review that we did, we actually just finished, like literally just finished a couple of weeks ago. And what we were looking at was the effect of aerobic exercise for individuals with stroke. So what you're looking at here is kind of the flow of studies through our criteria. So we initially looked at over 12,000 studies, ended up after everything, went through all of our screening with 27 studies that examined aerobic exercise interventions specifically, and only aerobic exercise intervention. So we eliminated studies where it was combined with other things and looked at this for stroke survivors. Of those 27 studies, 17 of them had positive cognitive outcomes associated with this aerobic exercise intervention, and 10 did not. So the question is, okay, why? What's the pattern, right? So we tried to figure out, like, what is it about those 17 studies where those individuals had positive cognitive effects following aerobic exercise intervention, and these other 10 studies didn't show the same thing, right? So we looked at exercise modalities, and what you can see here is basically there's no pattern, right? So, people were jogging, they were marching, they were just doing sit, stand, and if you look at the bottom here, the red lines are the studies where we did see a positive cognitive outcome. Blue lines are where we didn't. There's really nothing, right? Like I can't look at this and be like, oh, well, if you're on a rower, you'll have positive cognitive outcomes. No. Basically, the format of exercise didn't seem to matter. Then we looked at things like, well, does it matter if the exercise is done in a group? How about intensity? Remember, moderate intensity is supposed to be where the effects are. So what you're looking at here is the inside circle of all these little donut things. Those are the studies where we did not see a positive cognitive outcome. And then the outside circle is the studies where we did see a positive cognitive outcome. And what you can see here is these factors didn't seem to matter either, right? So you can see it most neatly in this circle right here in the upper right. So you can see that basically in exactly the same proportion of studies without versus with positive cognitive outcomes had their participants supervised during exercise, right? Same here. So the group versus individual, that didn't seem to matter either. So similar proportions of those studies had group versus individual exercise, no change in outcome. Intensity, surprisingly, also didn't seem to matter. Now, again, these are with stroke survivors, okay? But it didn't seem to matter if the activity was, light versus moderate versus high. We still saw the same proportion of studies showing positive versus no cognitive outcomes. Here's where we did find some trends. So in the stroke literature, we saw a much higher proportion of the studies with good cognitive outcomes combined aerobic and resistance training. So this would be exactly consistent with what we're seeing in the healthy aging literature, right? So combine aerobic with resistance training, you seem to get better cognitive results, not just physical results, cognitive results. The other pattern that we saw was that dose seemed to matter. So the studies with good cognitive outcomes had longer programs. So basically a huge proportion, half really, had physical activity programs or aerobic programs lasting 19 or more weeks. And you can see here that the studies without positive cognitive outcomes tended to be of shorter duration. We saw that dose mattered also in terms of frequency. So programs that were offered 3 days a week or 4 to 5 days a week, a much higher proportion of those studies had positive cognitive outcomes compared to the ones, again, where cognition really didn't seem to change. You can see that nearly half of those studies had their aerobics programs happening just 1 to 2 days a week. Okay, now, for me, as a speech pathologist, this is where the research gets really exciting. So we know that in the healthy aging population, exercise helps cognition, no questions, right? And in the neurogenic population, or in other words, people with brain injuries like dementia or stroke, we see a trend toward the same thing, although the results are a little bit mixed. What's cool to think about is using exercise as an adjuvant to other types of therapy. So in other words, I'm a speech pathologist. If I want to work on language or cognition with somebody, in grad school, I was taught about therapy for language or cognition. But how cool would it be if I can also have the individual that I'm working with do some aerobic exercise before they come see me, or maybe right after they see me? And then they'll have better attention, better memory, and they'll probably get more out of my therapy, right? That's where this research is kind of cool, because I think that rehabilitation specialists tend to be pretty siloed in their specialty. And so what this type of research is doing is really kind of opening our eyes to, hey, there's more out there than just, the part of the brain that I tend to be thinking about. And there's more ways to get at that part of the brain. So exercise can and should be combined with other sorts of things to really have the best effects. So remember, we had these 3 types of lifestyle factors that seem to moderate aging, right? So social networks, cognitive activity, physical activity. Physical activity has the strongest level of evidence, again, in the healthy aging literature. But then when you start looking at the disorder literature, what we see is that all 3 of these things actually seem to matter. In other words, we're seeing synergistic effects of all of these different lifestyle factors. So again, Dave had mentioned the study about the rats in an enriched environment. We're seeing the same thing with people. So this study, I think, illustrates that pretty well. So this is a 2012 study. And what these researchers did is they looked at individuals who were doing a lot of computer activities, including like brain training type of stuff. They looked at people who were exercising, and then they looked at people who were doing both things. And all of these people had what's called MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, which tends to be a precursor to dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And what they found is that computer use was helpful, but not statistically significant in terms of cognitive decline or preventing it. Physical exercise, same thing. It was helpful, not statistically significant in terms of preventing cognitive decline. But those individuals who did both, who were using computers and engaging in aerobic exercise, they were followed for 2 years, and they were the only group that had a statistically significant change in terms of their level of cognitive decline. It didn't change as much as the researchers would have expected. Okay, so the way to think about this for rehabilitation specialists, and really for all of us, is to think about aerobic exercise as really just a component of cognitive rehabilitation. So we know it's good for your body physically, but it's also really good for everybody cognitively. And again, I think that's something that's kind of counterintuitive. So thinking about it just as one of this broader array of interventions for cognition, whether we're trying to increase cognition or prevent cognitive decline in someone who's aging, with a healthy brain, or working with someone who has, say, dementia or who's a stroke survivor. Physical activity, aerobic activity matters, especially in terms of cognition. Now, Judy, here we go. Okay, so I have a really brief video. Well, it's actually about 5 minutes, showing a little bit of what I've done at Pine Acres. Do I have time to show it, Judy, or do you want me to hold
Yes,
up?
go ahead.
Okay. So what I'm going to show here, let's see if I can, whoops, let me pull it up here. Okay, here we go. Now it should work. Okay, so what I'm going to show here is just a quick video clip of some of the work that I've been doing at one of the area nursing homes in DeKalb. I'll try to speed through parts of it if we don't have enough time, but this is getting at this idea that yes, aerobic exercise matters, aerobic exercise helps, but so does social networking, any sort of cognitive stimulation. The video that you're about to see is showing some residents who've given permission to share, who have participated in a program that we're running called Zoom Pals. This was started during the pandemic, where we've been matching up residents of nursing homes with NIU students. They meet 2 to 3 times a week just to kind of chat and get some social interaction. And as Judy had mentioned in the beginning, these residents also are participating in the virtual format of Bridges Choir, where we all sing together. So I'll just kind of play this and then we'll go from there.
I look forward to it. They will tell me, they'll ask me, what day is Zoom Pals? And I'll tell them it's on Thursday. Well, he asks what time? And in the morning, it's Thursday. What time is Zoom Pals? They get really excited. And one of the residents will always say, I've got a list of what I want to talk about with my student today. They know what they're going to send me. Shortly after it is increased, they are much more vocal. They're a lot happier. They always tell me how beautiful the singing is, and the music is, and how much they love it.
I've been here and it's been kind of sudden when a few friends came along. They added a twist to everyday life that was very pleasant. Not only was it different people, it was different young people, as opposed to idiots like me that are beyond 75 years. They boost my morale, they make me smile. Of course, the younger crowd, funnier than us older people. Very enjoyable. They really enthusiasm. It makes a lot of difference to me.
Yeah.
Let Dr. Meyer keep doing this.
Why should they
It's a good thing for nursing homes, and I like it, I don't know about everybody, but I would be first one to come and grab, talk to anyone in these students, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior,
talk? They were very emotional, very intelligent.
Okay. Anything else?
Some are married and some are not. Some are just college students and they graduate this year.
I get a good feeling from it, mainly because I never went farther than high school. And I like to hear their views on decal and school and stuff like that that I never had. Well, I didn't talk to that many, but the ones I did talk to never mentioned the pandemic, which I was kind of glad of, that we didn't need to talk about that. Yeah, because otherwise it's very quiet and very dead. You can't talk to anybody and there's no conversations going on, and that's not part of life.
About not being old.
I'm old, but I don't feel old.
You don't feel old. You don't look old either, that's for sure.
I know I'm 88 pretty soon, and I feel good.
You feel good? Does it with and to sing with?
Yes,
Yeah.
well, makes you feel like home.
Makes it feel a little bit more like home. And what would you like to say to Dr. Mayer and her NIU student volunteers?
Thank you for everything, for how to write my book. Thank you for helping me with everything, you know. Not only the choir, but talking to everybody. Maybe get the guys to take part of it. It's in the choir, but I can't remember now.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white. The dark, sacred night, and I said to myself, what a wonderful world. Hopefully you got a sense there of some of the things that we've been doing. So again, this idea that exercise matters, it matters a lot. But for individuals with dementia and stroke, exercise matters, and so does cognitive and social skills, especially this year, I think. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mayer. And now we're bringing back Dave Benner. He's going to give us a little activity here, right, Dave?
Yep. I thought it would be a fun way to just kind of finish our presentation by doing some activities that stimulate our brain, that activate both the left and right hemisphere, to try to challenge everybody that's in the viewing area here to really do things that are tough, that are difficult for you to do, simply because a lot of you tend to use your dominant side. Whether if you're right-handed, then your left side of your brain tends to be the most active whenever you're doing certain activities, brushing your teeth or tying your shoes or doing lots of things. It tends to take control. Whereas if you don't stimulate the other side of your brain enough, it's gonna suffer in a way. So I've came up with a number of different exercises that help stimulate both the left and right hemisphere, to help challenge us to keep our brain active, to increase blood flow, to bring oxygen to the brain. Hopefully by doing this, we'll be increasing the neuron pathways, improving the amount of activity. Hopefully after you give these exercises a shot, maybe you feel like you can recall things a little easier, like your brain is a little more active. Just in general, if you want to take some of these exercises home to do kind of like for homework, that would be awesome. I like to encourage people to do these maybe whenever you wake up, as part of maybe a loosening routine, just to get your body moving, get the joints loosened up, get everything just going in the right direction, starting the day off in the right way. So some of the things that I was hoping that you guys could maybe participate on your own. Obviously, I can't see you, but the first one I want you to do is to point at your thumb. Now you'll notice with these exercises, I'm going to be doing things in moving in opposition or asymmetrical movements. These types of movements are very challenging for our both sides of our brains. They're challenging the neuron connections to go from one side to the other and to make it so this movement is fluid and not being messed up. And as you gain some practice with this becomes a lot easier. You can do things like switching it up from pinkies or other, I just, using the middle finger might be one you want to stay away from. Another exercise that's fun to try is doing finger touches. This exercise is really good for building finger dexterity. If you are somebody that has arthritis, this could be a really good exercise to just get the ligaments and tendons loosened up to start your day off. Touching every finger to your thumb is a simple way to loosen. But if you want to make this into more of a brain exercise, what we could do is we can start on opposite ends. So one will be on the pinky, the other one on your pointer, and then you touch and you go through and navigate each hand so you move in opposite directions. So one hand starts at the pinky and then moves all the way until you get to the end. And now again, we're moving asymmetrically. We're moving in opposition. We're challenging both sides of our brain to work in unison so we can coordinate this movement. Simple exercises like this not only help with our hands and our fingers and helps reduce the impact of arthritis, but can also build finger dexterity, help stimulate our brain, lots of positive benefits. Here's another one, fist and a palm. This is a pretty simple exercise, not too difficult here, where you alternate, but then I want to switch it to now go from open palm or spreading the fingers to closed, and then I want us to go fist to open. Now this isn't really that hard, but what's difficult about this is switching. It's the switch that makes these types of movements really challenging for your brain. To coordinate these type of movements, it takes practice. It takes a little bit of slow, repeated repetition just to make sure that you're staying on track. If you're working with somebody that is experiencing cognitive impairment, my advice is to be very patient with these types of exercises, specifically whenever you switch. Whenever you switch, a lot of the times it takes a little bit of time before you can coordinate that movement and then get it correct. And then once you start to get in a rhythm, it's pretty easy. It's then that switch moment that really takes you back to that starting point of, oh, I've got to really make sure that this movement's right. Am I doing it right with my left hand or my right hand? That kind of thing. Another one that I like to do is doing flippers. So one hand goes up, the other hand goes down. You can actually do this with your feet at the same time as well. Since you can't see my feet, I'll do it, but you can't see it. So you're just going to have to imagine my left foot going up and down and my right hand or my right foot going side to side. So my feet are doing opposite movements, and then I switch. Now this movement is not really that hard. Really all I'm doing is moving my hands up and down or side to side. It's the switch again that makes it difficult. And once I start to incorporate the bottom part or my lower body, it becomes even more difficult. The idea with this is to incorporate more muscle groups, more body parts. The more things that you can incorporate into these types of movements and stimuli, the more the brain has to be challenged to make efficient neuron connections. The more connections that they're able to efficiently make, the more chance of angiogenesis and neurogenesis occurring. Also, just in general, increasing of blood flow and oxygen to the brain is never a bad thing. I always like to play the piano here, so keep those fingers moving. And the hand that's going up and down, I like to call this the spider crawling up and down the water spout. Simple exercise to get my fingers moving. And then we're going to switch There's nothing too difficult about this, just trying to get our fingers going. You can even move your fingers or your hands up and down and side to side, as well as your feet as well. So I know you can't see my feet, but yes, I am moving one up and down, the other one side to side. Again, playing the piano like this and crawling up and down the water spout is working on fine motor movements, helping improve my finger dexterity, helping improve coordination, while also stimulating my brain. Another exercise is touching your ear and your nose in opposition. This is a simple exercise that most of you probably won't really have too much trouble with. And then switch hands, nose to ear, and then switch again. I've practiced this exercise for several years. It's amazing how many people struggle with this one. Here's what tends to happen. They don't go all the way out, or they're going like this, and all it's taking is a little rhythm, a little bit of practice, a little bit of coordination to make these movements possible. You can coordinate it so now instead of the hand out in front touching the nose, the hand out front touches the ear, the hand to the side touches the nose. It's these little manipulations or switches that make the exercise stimulating for the brain, which have those positive increases in what you're doing. The last one that I want to do is an exercise I call stirring the pot. I'm going to try to scoot back just a little bit here. And it's an exercise where I pretend like there's a big pot in between my legs and I'm holding on to a wooden spoon and I'm stirring the pot by maneuvering my weight and shifting my weight from each side of my hips out in front to the side, to the back and to the other side. And I'm just going in a circular motion with my hands and my upper body and my hips. Now it becomes a brain stimulation exercise whenever I move my hands in the opposite direction as my body. So this movement takes a lot more coordination because it's just an unnatural movement for my body to move in the opposite direction as my hands. So one thing that I'm hoping that you guys are able to take away from this is simple exercises that can help coordination, help stimulate your brain, help increase blood flow, and maybe even just loosen up your body. It's a good way to start your morning. It would be great for homework if you wanted to try to take something home with you to, just make some positive improvements each day. Whether it be walking or doing some strength training or just some simple loosening and brain exercises to get that brain active, that's what I'm hoping you're able to take away from this. I think what I'll do now is I'll transition back to Judy here and say thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Dave. So we're going to give I see we have a couple of questions already in our Q&A, and we're going to give everyone just a few minutes to refresh their drinks and write in a few questions or comments in the Q&A. I will read the questions and the speakers will respond verbally. Some of you may want to ask your question of the speaker directly, and you can by raising your hand. We'll give you access to the mic, and then we'll turn it off right after if you choose to do that. While we are waiting for the people to write in their questions, I want to remind you of our next STEM Café, which is scheduled for July 14th, Wednesday at 6 p.m. The physics of the Olympics. So we'll get our Olympics fix with Dr. Jared Adelman and Mike Eads, are professors of physics at NIU. And we do have that survey link for the chat. Hopefully Becky put it out there. We also will be sending out a little survey with a thank you to you for having joined us today. We are just about ready to start that discussion then. We have a couple questions. Let's go ahead and start. Okay, we have 3 questions. What about the impact of weight on cognition? And either one of you can respond, or we'll have both of you respond. So the question is, what about the impact of weight on cognition?
I think, and Dave would probably be better to respond for this, given his area of expertise, but my short answer would just be it's really cardiorespiratory fitness that matters. So, you know, I think someone could weigh more or less than they want to, but that's really not what matters. How well your heart's working, how well your lungs are working, how fit you are. That's more important. Dave, I'll let you take that one.
All right. I interpret that question as resistance training whenever they're referring to weight, although maybe it can be interpreted as body composition. I'm not 100% sure on that. Deborah, if you want to clarify that, maybe we could work on that here here in the next couple minutes. But as far as resistance training goes, specifically, there are some benefits. I know that Jamie, Dr. Mayer also highlighted this, but there's plenty of benefits to be had that we highlighted, specifically short-term memory positively improved with just even light resistance training. And I think just the main takeaway with that is even doing the bare minimum low resistance training is going to reap you some positive benefits. Now, moderate intensity is going to show a little more, but something is better than nothing. And if you can start to just start and then build up on it, you're going to see those positive improvements.
And Evelyn is asking whether we could have the video of Dave doing the exercises. And the person said, I know for me that would be very helpful. And I agree with her because I'm extremely uncoordinated. And I know I'm not going to remember everything that you said, but I was interested in trying them as well. We will have this, we have this recorded. And in a couple weeks, it will be online. So actually, you could come onto the NIU STEAM website and click on STEM cafes and then go to recorded cafes, and you should be able to get it as well. But and that's the actual way that you should be getting the video. But you'll have to give us about a couple of weeks for that. And Deborah is saying that she was referring to body weight.
I think that obviously your body composition is going to be improved through physical activity, whether it be anaerobic or aerobic. Aerobic exercise is going to show a little quicker and a little be a little more efficient at improving body composition, simply because it's going to really highlight your cardiovascular system, which will help you burn more calories. But as far as your body weight, specifically contributing to your cognition, you know, I haven't dived too much into that literature, so I'm not super confident on speaking about, you know, somebody who's below average weight versus somebody who might be obese, and what kind of cognitive impairment effects or potential effects might be there. Maybe Dr. Mayer could speak on that. I'm not real sure, but I do know having favorable body composition is going to have positive impacts on your brain, specifically for increased blood flow, body, and oxygen.
I think I would just add, I mean, I think this is why it's hard to look at like the cross-sectional and correlational studies, and it's why those intervention studies are a stronger design. You know, because everything matters, right? So, you know, if someone is obese and because of that they have less social interaction, or, you know, they're participating in fewer activities, you know, then yes, it's going to matter. But I think there's multi-directional relationships there. And that's why it's kind of hard to piece apart something like that.
I especially appreciated what you said about, and both of you, I think, mentioned it, about the fact that some physical activity before you do something else really enhances your brain and your capabilities. And so maybe before a test or maybe before some other kind of activity, it's very helpful to do even a moderate type of activity or exercise before. Maybe you'd like to recap and talk about that, because I thought that was an important takeaway.
And I know Dave had touched on this, and I use this as well. So when classes were in person, so not this year, but when classes were in person, my graduate students, I have like a 3-hour block, and I always make the students do 2 laps around our health and wellness building at the beginning of class and then during a middle class break. And I do the 2 laps with them, so I know that they're all doing it. Some hate it, some don't. But yeah, that's, we know that being active enhances memory and learning. And one of the things that I thought was really exciting was just thinking about that and then thinking how exercise can and should be an adjuvant to something as simple as speech therapy, cognitive therapy. Rather than the therapist kind of working in their silo and being like, okay, we're going to work on cognition now. Use what we know about physical activity and integrate that first or after. Dave, if you wanted to add.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Mayer here. She's nailing it. I did want to just shoot out some information. I see that Evelyn is asking for a video of the exercises that I just did. If anybody else is interested in that, then you can just email me. My email is dbennerjr@niu.edu. I've made multiple videos of myself and others doing these same exercises. I've got about a 45-minute video of just as many exercises that can stimulate the brain and a bunch of asymmetrical movements, things that stimulate the left and right hemisphere. I've got that video on me right now. So if you just email me asking for it, I would be more than happy to pass that along. I would be thrilled to know that you're using that stuff in your day-to-day routine, maybe starting your morning off with it, or using it for a loved one, a parent, grandparent, that sort of thing.
Dave, if you wouldn't mind sending those to me. Many times people do email me after the program and they might not remember what your email is. So if you would share those with me as well, that would be appreciated.
No problem.
I think it's important. I think we took away a lot from your presentations. I think just naturally we get less active as we go, and you really emphasized how important it is to keep some level of activity going, and how it enhances us, maybe to even take a walk first thing in the morning before we get going with whatever we're doing. I think even though I am uncoordinated, I think working on that kind of thing on a regular basis make me more coordinated. So as you say, that people have to practice those, and you practice that for many years. And so I think it's important that people know that they can start small in order to do some of these kinds of things, and then add on to it or increase it as they go. And I see somebody has their hand raised. Becky, can you help us with that?
Hi, Judy, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is Chris Hill from Kinesiology and Physical Education. Dave, Jamie, very nice presentation from the both of you. So I have mainly a question actually targeted at Jamie. I'm hoping maybe you could help me out here. So I was hoping to know if there's any information about whether aerobic exercise or resistance exercise, do they have any effects on different kinds of aphasia or differential effects? So for Wernicke's or Broca's aphasia, are there differentiating effects of the modality of exercise?
So that's an excellent question. So briefly, like Broca's aphasia is what we would call like non-fluent, where individuals have trouble getting words out, just like 1 or 2 words at a time. whereas Wernicke's aphasia would be someone who like talks a lot but has a lot of trouble understanding. Now, unfortunately, there is like no information about that in the literature because no one, so in all that literature about people with stroke who engage in physical activity and then researchers are measuring cognition, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was something like, there were like total of close to like 2,000 participants in those 27 studies we looked at, and pretty sure 16 had documented aphasia. So what's happening in the stroke literature is that people with aphasia are actually being excluded from those studies. And typically it's as simple as the researcher can't get informed consent because they have trouble either understanding or producing language, or they might have trouble following directions, whatever the physical or aerobic activity is. So actually one of the things that our group is working on publishing is the results of our review and saying, hey, we need more people in these studies who have aphasia or who have cognitive disorders associated with right hemisphere disorder, and like get them in these studies so that we can really see what happens, because it's really hard to draw conclusions given the really tiny numbers so far. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was actually one of the main points of the review that we did. I just didn't put it in this talk because I didn't think anyone would want to know.
Did you have anything to add to that, Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Chris is my office right next to mine, so I appreciate you showing up and watching the presentation here, buddy. Jamie's awesome. Great answer. That's all I have to that.
I don't know if anybody knows, but I actually connected these two speakers to each other, and they were both working at different times, opposite ends of the day, with the same population, and it's quite exciting that they know each other right now, because they're in the midst of a lot of research. Both of them are doing research and will be continuing to do the research, and it's quite exciting that they now can actually compare notes and also talk about some kind of a plan possibly to work together with the same population or with other populations, however they decide to work together. But I've heard them speaking about it, and I think it's quite exciting. Exciting for me that I actually made that connection. And also, I'm interested in hearing a little bit before we close about the wonderful work both of you have done during the pandemic, which we're not over yet, but getting close and much more improved. But we could hear those people at the home talking about how sad and how lonely they actually were, and it seemed to me, during the pandemic, because they had said they weren't allowed interaction with others, which we know was the case, and it was to protect them. But their mental health is so important as well, and they so much appreciated seeing young faces and young people from the university come. I heard some of the comments that they were just excited about interacting with those students, and I know you've been doing some other wonderful work with them and communicated with me during the pandemic about what you were doing. And maybe you want to share exactly what you were doing with those people during the pandemic. Most of it was virtual, I think.
Sure. So, and I know Dave has been able to work with individuals in person, which is awesome. For me, everything I was doing prior to the pandemic, it was singing, it was music, it was all shut down when COVID hit. And at first, just like everyone else, I thought this would be, a month, 2 months, 3 months. Okay, we just won't do anything. And then it became clear when the fall semester started, and nothing was getting better, that we needed to do something. So I had mentioned Zoom Pals real briefly. So that was a program that I started at Pine Acres, where I was matching up the residents with NIU students who would be a couple, 2-3 times a week. And just chat. And I didn't show the video of it because not everyone on that video had permission to share. But the first time that we all got on Zoom Pals, so it was just, a Zoom meeting, We had a bunch of individuals, many of whom are in mild to moderate stages of dementia, all on iPads. And when they saw one another on the iPads, I mean, they were excited to see the students, but they also, their minds were blown just seeing one another. And I hadn't realized kind of the depth of how isolated they were. I mean, they were excited about seeing people who live right down the hall from them or rooms across the hall from them. And the activities director got on and she was like, they haven't seen each other in 6 months. And they literally lived, 15 feet away from one another. That was how lockdown, the nursing home kind of everything. So seeing that, it just, again, I think it speaks to why in some of this literature, we're seeing, effects of physical activity, but also just effects of anything that we can do to help social connectedness, cognitive stimulation, anything. They need it, they want it. And what's cool about being at NIU and having all of our students here is that we're in a position to help. So that's what we're doing.
Dave, do you want to say what some of the things you've been doing?
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned it at the beginning whenever I started, but I've been working out at the local retirement home here in DeKalb Sycamore, and we experienced quite a bit of absence, I guess you could call it, due to the COVID restrictions. Not the same amount of people were coming in and exercising regularly, simply because fitness centers were shut down. So we had to go to one-on-one training. We couldn't do group exercise anymore. We couldn't do some of the normal routines that we would typically do. Once the restrictions started to ease up, the attitudes of everybody being willing to come back was just inspirational to see how eager everybody was to get back to moving, exercising, not just the physical activity part, but the socialization, being able to see the people that they just lived a few doors away from, but yet they've been locked away. They couldn't eat dinner together. They were all eating their meals in their house, in their apartments, all by themselves. So there was a sense of isolation that I could tell was weighing on them, and the place that they were just so happy to be at was the exercise room, or the area that their people were able to be at, to just accumulate to. And it was pretty inspirational to see how motivated they were to get back into it, how ready they were to just do what they were normally doing, that normal, the sense of normal. And it was just, it made a huge impact on how important it is to exercise, and how important it is to be a facilitator of group exercises, or in general, being able to bring groups of people together so they can stimulate their brain, socialize, and find that avenue to connect with each other, because isolation, in my opinion, has some negative consequences on your mental health. Yeah. I don't know.
Thank you very much. Do you have any final, I think you have said it, but if you have any final takeaways to the audience, I think that we don't have any more questions right now.
I'll start. One main takeaway that I hope is just get started. That tends to be the hardest thing to do, is to just start. Build something into a routine, and start small. If you can build these little things into your daily routine, like stretching or walking, and then slowly build on it, whether it just be a few more steps every day on your pedometer, or whether it be an extra stretch or two, or an extra lift or resistance training, whatever it might be, if you can just start small and then slowly build on it, you're going to reap the benefits. Physically, mentally, your quality of life will improve, your attitude will improve. There's so many positive takeaways from this. My best advice is to just get started. Even if it's little incremental things, just get started and then work little by little, and you'll see the improvements.
And I don't have anything to add really that I haven't already said, but just thank you for having us both. Can't wait until we're all in person again, but in the meantime, Zoom has its benefits. Thank you.
And I don't know if you said this before, but I just wanted to say that it's important for us, it sounds like, to get in the habit of doing any kind of exercise early on, because then we're in the habit of doing this, because we want to preserve what we have, correct? Because even though we can do these exercises and other kinds of things to enhance what we already have, it is difficult to regain something we've lost. So we just need to, all of us, young or old or whatever age we are, to just be diligent about that. And I thank you, Dave, for saying just get started. And so some of us don't think it's so overwhelming that we can't do it, because I'm excited to go ahead and do these things myself. I'm always making resolutions, and I think all of us are, but it sounds like we could just start with something simple, as you say. So we're going to conclude now. I have a few reminders for you as we close tonight. And thank you again, Dr. Mayer and Dave Benner. You have been wonderful speakers and engaging. Our next STEM Cafe will be the Physics of Olympics, and it's going to be June 14th, 6 p.m. I know they're having a limited audience in Japan, but we certainly can get our fix from our two professors who have spoken for us several times before. They're exciting and fun professors. If you are interested in sponsoring an NIU STEM Cafe or donating for STEMfest through our Huskies United campaign, the link to donate is go.niu.edu/give-NIU-STEAM. Our STEMfest fundraiser, Huskies United 2021. STEMfest is scheduled for June 23rd and 24th for 31 hours. I will be reaching out to you to remind you we welcome your donations, large or small. And this year we're celebrating STEMfest the entire month of October, and we're going to have a big bash on October 23rd. You will find today's recorded event in about 2 weeks because we need to provide for closed captioning. Go to NIU website, put STEM Cafe in the search, and you will come to a page that has upcoming STEM Cafes, past STEM Cafes, and recorded STEM Cafes. We shared Dave Benner's email address in the chat. If you have any further comments or want me to reach out to our speakers, please email me. Thank you to our NIU web media and e-learning staff, Rebecca Griffith and Samantha Click, for assisting us with the Zoom platform this evening. Thank you, audience, for joining us tonight. Thank you again, Dr. Mayer and Dave Benner Jr., and our sponsor, Thermo Fisher Scientific. And thank you to our audience again for joining us this evening. Let us know what topics you would like us to discuss in the future. Join us July 14th, 6 p.m. for the Physics of the Olympics. Have a good evening.